Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am fine. How are you today?
Great.
I will say, because I hate to start the podcast with weather, because we're not the weather channel, but good grief, it was nice this morning.
Yes.
I was out doing chores going, maybe I'll put a sweatshirt on.
Wow.
In August.
I would never do that, but.
Well, no, you wouldn't. Do you even own a sweatshirt?
I do.
Okay. Just in 15 years, I haven't seen you wear one.
Well, my sweatshirts are kind of fancy. They don't really look like sweatshirts.
Well, and see, that explains it. All right. Well, we have I think we're going to have a great hour for you. Brett Farley is a fascinating guy. Lots of things to talk about with Mr. Farley this morning. So we are not going to waste a lot of time, and we'll bring Mr. Farley on this morning and say good morning. Brad, how are you today?
Good morning. I am great. Good to be with you guys.
And I was joking with him about his screensaver earlier because he said, what? And I said, well, it's because you're in Wyoming or something and you can't hear me. So we're going to watch your screensaver go to places that we really want to be this morning.
I like to accommodate travel vicariously.
Yeah. That's the way I like to travel myself.
What's the matter with you people? I just need to find somebody to go with me, and clearly it isn't either one of you. All right. Well, Brett, thank you for joining us this morning. It's funny, but I have known of you for, 15 years. Something like that?
Yeah, I think you and I met, gosh, it must have been 2010 when I was with American Majority. If I remember correctly, we did a training. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And what was American Majority?
Well, back then, I don't know what it is now, but back then it was a conservative training organization that would partner with grassroots folks on the ground to train on, campaign organizations, social media, all kinds of things. So we did a lot of great work. Got get some members elected to the legislature. We trained Congressman Bridenstine, which was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, I know that you came and trained our organization at one point too. So, you have a website. What's the name of it again?
My personal site, brettfarley.us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was on brettfarley.us quite a bit last night, and I found out, even though I've kind of known of you, for a long time, you have quite an interesting background and history. So you were a Baptist, and you're no longer a Baptist. You're now a Catholic. And you're such a Catholic that you're now in charge of the Catholic. Tell us what you are.
So my title is Executive Director for the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma. And that's a fancy way of saying I'm the lobbyist for the Catholic bishops. Now the irony here is that actually, after I left American Majority, I sort of was getting sick of politics. And I was trying to get out of politics. So I would dabble in, some business ventures here and there, and for inexplicable reasons, they would fall apart. And meanwhile, doors kept opening in politics. Like God wanted me to remain in politics, but I couldn't figure out why. Shortly after I left American Majority, my wife and I converted to the church, and then both Archbishop Coakley and Bishop Conderle came in pretty close to each other in terms of timing from Texas and Kansas, respectively, both of which have Catholic conferences and have had for a while. So when they got here, they were asking their staff, well, where's the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma? And their staff said, the what? So they realized pretty quickly they needed to establish an organization and they needed somebody to run it. And so I raised my hand and said, maybe that's the reason I'm still in politics. So here we are.
And Julia, you had a good question for him before we got on.
Yeah, what is the Catholic Conference exactly?
Basically, we are the political arm of the church in Oklahoma. So anything that touches civics and public policy and all of that is my domain. So obviously the church has a lot to say about politics. Everything eventually becomes a moral question. And so the church for 2,000 years has spoken into the moral realm. And so that's the Catholic Conference is our voice in that sphere.
And how is that different from the archdiocese and the diocese?
So the Diocese of Tulsa and the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City run everything in terms of ministry and church governance and all of that. The Catholic Conference is the policy and political exponent of both the dioceses. So I have two bosses. I'm, I think, the only Catholic in the state that has two bosses in the bishops. So Archbishop Coakley and Bishop Conderle in Tulsa, I have to report to both of them. Again, on matters of policy.
So behave
and
yourself.
Politics. That's right. I've got 4 eyeballs watching me closely, but we have a great relationship, and we're singing from the same sheet of music. And obviously, during session at the state capitol, we get very busy as we're trying to advance policy that the church cares a lot about, and in some cases, kill bills that the church is very concerned about.
Right. So, give us an example of a bill that the church cares about. Or let's say this, because authors of bills don't even know what bills they are. So I should rephrase and say, what kind of things, what issues are you worried about when session is in?
Sure, that's a great question. It's a hard question to answer because, again, the church cares about everything in one way or another. Now, obviously, we have priorities, and because we deal with human endeavors and human frailty and human sin. We're never running out of problems to solve. So that's job security for me.
Sadly.
So, but some things that you would expect. Obviously, the sanctity of life is number one. If we don't have the right to life, then all other rights really don't matter. But education choice is a big priority of ours. Religious freedom. Criminal justice reform, and we could go on down the line. There are all kinds of things that are of great concern to the church, that are prevailing concerns given the problems we have to address here in Oklahoma. But those are just some that we work on a regular basis every year.
Well, so I'm just curious. And now this is kind of a question out of left field. So you can either, parry or strike. Sure. I don't know, but so the Pope isn't like a super conservative guy. So
that's a fair statement.
How do you deal with that as a Catholic in Oklahoma, which fortunately, I think, even though I wouldn't call us a red state anymore, I mean, we're still certainly way far ahead of the left or right coast, or the left or left coast, I should say. So, I mean, we're still better than that. So how do you where is that tension? Is there a tension that comes in there at all? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, we try not to characterize the church in terms of traditional left-right terms, because the church at the end of the day is an ecclesial body. It's not a political body.
And that's fair.
Yeah, one of the key principles they're what we call the three-legged stool of Catholic social teaching: the sanctity of life, solidarity, and then subsidiarity. And so that subsidiarity leg is the one that details the fact that local governance, as political conservatives, we would understand this to mean local government is the best. And Thomas Jefferson was very explicit on this principle that government that governs local governs best, I think. And I may be butchering the quote, but that's very true in a Catholic understanding as well. Right. So The local bishops reign supreme in terms of what policies and principles are at play. So the Vatican really doesn't have a lot of weight in terms of what goes on in Oklahoma City or Tulsa. Obviously, there are some things that are universal in the church, but most of what happens locally is a decision by the local bishop.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question because I've always wanted to know that. And so that's very interesting. So thank you for that.
You bet.
All right. So I want to go on and talk a little bit about your family. Your family, you have, you come from a long, you have two brothers. So there are three boys, right?
Right.
And your dad was in the Navy and other brothers in the Navy?
Yeah, so my dad was one of three boys. He had two sisters as well, and all three of them, including our grandfather, were in the military. Now, I've come from a long line of military on both sides of the family. My maternal grandfather was also in the military, so my brothers and I were steeped in that environment, just a sense of giving back and serving. I recall often a story my dad told me. I was in Navy ROTC in college. And I remember coming home my freshman year complaining about the upperclassmen sort of hazing the freshmen, and it was obviously an unpleasant experience. And I said, they
don't call that hazing for nothing.
That's right. I said, Dad, I would expect that there would be some sort of respect given to the fact that we're here giving of our time freely, serving our nation. And he stopped me and said, son, you've got it all wrong. It is a privilege to serve your country. You owe your country, and the fact that you have the right to serve is a privilege, and that's how you need to see it. So they don't owe you anything, and it was kind of a shocker, but he was absolutely right.
Ouch, Dad.
Yeah, he was good for statements like that.
But that's the honestly, I think the best parents are the parents who can look their kids in the face and not blow hot air up their skirt and tell them what needs to be said and be truthful. You don't have to be ugly about it, but just say, like your dad did, pretty cut and dried. Sorry, bud. This is the way it is. I love
the way it is. That's right.
Yep. So you had two brothers and now you have four daughters.
Yeah, that's been quite the shocker. I'm the oldest of three boys. And so, again, raised in a military family, as you might expect. I'm Mr. Type A, Mr. Discipline, my way or the highway. And that doesn't work so well with girls.
Oh, no.
So I often tell people, I've got four girls ranging in age from 19 to 6, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Just when you think you figured it out, the next one has a different personality or different circumstances. And so I'm flying by the seat of my pants here.
Yeah, I honestly, when I saw that you had four girls, I was like, I'm starting to pray for you now.
Prayers are greatly appreciated. Yes.
Because even if you just had one boy in there, just a little testosterone can even that out. But I can't imagine four girls.
Our dog is male, so I get that connection there.
Praise the Lord. Yeah, because that's wow, and it's a beautiful.
He and I have
family.
A connection. Well, thank you.
Well, it's funny that you say that because I have 5 kids and I have 3 girls and 2 boys, but the girls are all out of here. They're gone. And the boys are still living at home. So it's 3 boys and 1 girl. And it's oftentimes
a different kind of show, isn't it?
Yeah. Oftentimes I just feel like I'm the house mother.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
That's it.
At your house.
So tell us about your girls.
Well, so the oldest is Rebecca. She's 19. She
beautiful
graduated
too.
from
I can
Guinness.
tell the difference between her and your wife in your family picture.
I will share that with my wife. She will be happy to hear that.
Wait, this is weird. What are Catholics doing? Are they?
Well, and we didn't start all that young. I think it was, 27 when she was born. I was back into my grad school. Wow,
you're a very young looking family.
Well, thanks. I use pearl cream. So, she's 19. She graduated from McGinnis High School. And we had an interesting education trajectory for her. She went to the Academy of Classical Christian Studies. For the most part, we did a little bit of homeschooling in there, and then her final 2 years were spent at McGinnis. She has taken a gap year and still trying to figure out what she wants to do. She loves politics and she loves apparel design. So
Oh,
I don't know where those two meet. I told her she needs to be an image consultant for politicians. So we'll see what happens.
That's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, I knew lots of folks in DC that did that and actually made quite a living doing that. So surprise, surprise, elected officials don't always know how to put together a suit. So
no, we've seen some. Who's the? Oh,
we won't mention names.
Yeah. Well, no. I was talking about, because everybody knows him. He's a Democrat. All he ever wears are sweatshirts and shorts everywhere he goes.
Yes. Oh gosh, I'm blanking. Senator from New Jersey.
Yes. And you're just like, buddy, who elected you? So yes, there are those out there. So now, are all your kids in Catholic school, or are you?
No, it's a funny story. We decided before we started having kids that we would pick a system of education and put them all through that system. It would be the perfect system. And
that was before you had kids.
Before we had kids, we figured out very quickly that was not going to work. So we decided early on we weren't going to put our kids in public schools, and we can dig into that a little bit. But what we figured out quickly was that kids are all different. And each of them have different needs, different skills, different personalities. And so that means, that we have to individualize things a lot. So our second, Victoria, who is 12, has spent most of her time in the academy. We are actually homeschooling her this year for the first time. And she's basically a genius. And so we're having to contend with that she is very intelligent and she knows it. So that's fun.
Honestly, when people don't get that. I mean, you have an intelligent kid, you're as bad off or maybe even worse off as a parent. You had a child that, you really are not, doesn't understand. It's just, oh my goodness. Yeah, it's a tough road to make sure that kid gets what that kid needs. So yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, trying to keep up with her and convince her that mom and dad actually know what we're talking about. We know you're very smart, but we also know a thing or two. So she's interesting. Number 3 is Christiana. She's 8. And she has homeschooled for the most part. We had her in a Charlotte Mason school last year, and then we're going to be homeschooling her again this year. Very bright. She's more of our outdoors oriented kid, so very kinetic learner. So she loves animals, bugs, all of that sort of thing. So trying to craft an environment for her that is very, again, kinetic and touchy and feely and that kind of thing is it's challenging but fun. And then our youngest, Catherine, is 6. She has Down syndrome, so that brings its own set of challenges. But she's a blessing and a lot of fun. Easily the most outgoing.
You have a video of her on your website from when she turned 4. She is beautiful. Oh my goodness!
Thank you. She is a lot of fun.
With that cupcake.
She does not. Everybody's a friend. She's not afraid to meet anybody. I will take her out, to go out to eat or whatever, and she's made 5 friends in 30 seconds. It's really amazing. We have to peel her away from all of her new friends. We actually have to sit down and eat now, honey. So she's a lot of fun, but has all kinds of interesting challenges. So it's every day is a new day.
Now, are you going to home? I'm sorry, Jules.
Homeschooled or?
Yeah, she's going to be homeschooled as well. So we've been doing sort of a custom preschool. She was actually in the Charlotte Mason school as well, which accommodates special needs. And we're going to homeschool her this year and going to do a customized education plan for her as well.
Wow. So you have, really honestly, you run the gamut.
We do.
Yeah.
It's again, kudos to my wife. She has her hands.
Yeah. No kidding. Okay. So let's go back and let's talk a minute about your dad, because one of the things that I was really, really interested in, your father, Well, why don't you just give kind of the background? I was going to put up
Sure.
here. This is on a page that you have on your website, which is the memorial that was held for your dad. And, as you're looking down, you're like, well, Condoleezza Rice doesn't speak at most people's, memorial services.
Right.
So why don't you talk a little bit about your dad?
Sure. So again, military family. He was out of college, actually, out of high school. Sorry, he enlisted in the Army and was in Korea during Vietnam. He was a non-combatant, but spent time in country there. Came back to Edmond and got his MBA at what was then Central State, now UCO. He and my mother were married right before he left to go to Korea. And then after he got his MBA, was commissioned as an officer in the US Navy. So we moved out to Rhode Island and were stationed in Newport in 1980. And so fun story there. I really enjoyed my time there in my formative years. We were there for just short of 4 years, and my parents decided it was time to come back home when I started sounding like the Kennedy. So, I would say, let's get in the car. And they said, okay, we're done. We're out.
We're out of here.
Yeah. But, in the Navy, especially in a port town like Newport, it's expected that, you're stationed and assigned to a ship. And so you go out to sea for 6 months at a time. And, having 3 sons, you need to be at home. You're teaching your sons how to be a man. And you can't do that if you're at sea 6 months at a time. And so he realized pretty quickly, that his time as an active duty naval officer should be short, and he should transfer to the reserves and come home. And so that's ultimately what happened. And in 1984, we moved back home, and he transferred to the reserve and went into business at that point. So fast forward to the war in Iraq, he ultimately still in the reserve. This is 30 years later. Just had always had this sense of calling for service. And at that point, we were running a family janitorial business, and we were very successful. But this overriding sense of needing to do something to respond to a higher call never went away. And so when General Petraeus was commissioned by President Bush to start the surge campaign in Iraq to just push forward and end this campaign, they reached out to the private sector, particularly those in the reserve units who had business and hospital administration experience and just civil government experience. And so he responded to that call and said, I'm in. So he went through the Department of State to get trained in terms of just what's going on the ground there in Iraq, and was quickly sent over there. So that was 2008. And so he went over there as a non-combatant, and first under the DoD umbrella. So he went there in uniform and was assigned to a Sadr City, which is a 1.3 million population suburb, if you can believe that, of Baghdad. And so this is still when things were pretty hot. You had a lot of insurgents coming in various areas of Iraq trying to destabilize things, funded and backed by Iran, of course. So he was there for about 10 months. Came home for Christmas and then transitioned to the Department of State. So then he took off his uniform, put on civilian clothes, but went back doing essentially the same thing. His job was under the Department of State was to train civilian leaders in Sadr City to essentially set up democracy. So at that point, things had been stabilized. They were trying to rebuild hospitals and schools and post offices and things like this to try to get a functioning civil operation going on. And so my father led the team there in Sadr City to, help them set up a city council. What do city council elections look like? How do you run a functioning democratic operation in a war-torn area like this that really hasn't had, a historical understanding of democracy?
Yeah.
So in the course of doing that, they were in the process of conducting these elections so that it wouldn't be Americans governing the local
Right.
operation, but it would be actual Iraqi civil servants. And so in the early spring of 2008, he brought over some Iraqi civil government leaders to the U.S. to tour various cities to kind of get an idea of what civil government looks like. They got a chance to meet with President Bush at the White House, which was quite an honor for them. Went to a number of cities, including Denver and New York and so forth, and ultimately made their way to Oklahoma City. So they got to meet with state legislators in Oklahoma City. They went to Guthrie to tour the original state capitol. It was really a lot of fun. They got to go to Bricktown, and we had an opportunity to spend some time with them. And it was really neat because we got to understand what the average Iraqi local leader looks like, and they were not a lot. Obviously, they're Islamic, but at the end of the day, they didn't want anything different than what we want. You know, we want safety, we want education, we want healthcare for our kids, and they want the same thing. They just wanted civil government to work so that their kids can thrive in a way that Americans do, and so they wanted to see. You know, they were really enamored with Walmart, for instance. You know, you go to Walmart and you have all this food. How is this possible, right? It harkens back to the story I'm sure you guys are familiar with, where Reagan took Gorbachev around to some American cities, and they didn't believe that you could go to the marketplace and have all these options that the free market provides. And so the Iraqis had a similar response. You know, they were really inspired by what they saw, that this is something that's possible in Iraq, again, a region that hadn't known government, democratic government before. So he went back over with them with the intent of implementing certain measures to help them achieve this. And he really regarded them as kind of his brothers across the ocean, and you know, wanted to help inspire them to do the things that we've done here and taken for granted here in the U.S. So in June of 2008, they had a pretty pivotal election set up where they were going to elect these local councilmen to begin implementing these provisions. Again, still quite literally under fire from Iranian-backed insurgents. And they went in one morning on June 24th, 2008 to do some preparation planning for that meeting. And an IED had been planted in the local governance office there. So my father, 3 other Americans, and some Iraqis were in this office planning when that IED went off. And so he was killed along with 3 Americans, and some Iraqis were severely injured, thankfully not killed. So he was assassinated along with some other folks as Iranian terrorists were trying to stop the progression of democratic government in Iraq. And so obviously, you know, that led to, you know, a number of memorial events where Condoleezza Rice presided there at the State Department in DC. You'll see a video there on the webpage. Then Congressman Duncan Hunter memorialized him on the floor of the House, and some other pretty neat highlights that we've had from civil leaders. Secretary of State John Kerry, who succeeded Condoleezza Rice, honored him as well. There at the State Department, there's a memorial plaque for those that have been killed as a result of terrorist activity around the globe. And so he's been honored there. You see that video with that plaque in the background behind John Kerry. So, you know, obviously it's been bittersweet. We're very proud of his service, you know, but there's not a day that goes by that we don't think about him and the loss, particularly that the grandchildren in our family have, because my oldest is the only grandchild that ever knew him. She was 4 going on 5 when he was killed. So 15 grandkids, 14 never knew him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. Yeah. But you know what, a great story, you know, and yeah, my mother just passed in February, and she was a very, very, I mean, she was a philanthropist deluxe. Right. You know, and you often think about your parents, especially, you know, parents, people who do things like that. And since she's passed, I kind of wonder, it's an everyday, am I doing enough?
Right.
Am I doing something that she would have done? I mean, do I need to shift my focus? It's,
Sure.
I mean, it can almost be in a way hard, having a legacy like that, because you the idea of, a parent who, worked so hard and did so much, and then, they're just gone, and it's
Right.
kind of like, it's so that's tough. That's a tough situation. So
It is, and it's a tough legacy to live up to. This is what I explained to our oldest. Again, she's 19, and I've said, look, your grandfather did his job in laying a foundation, first of all, of faith, being brought up in a Christian home, but secondly, just understanding principles of self-government and free enterprise and self-sufficiency. And so my job is to take what he has given us, both our parents have given us, and to what I call leveling up. Our job is to take that and to go to the next level, to give take all those tools and serve even greater. And so, Rebecca, that's your job. Your job is to take what your mother and I are giving you, and for you to level up. If you sort of just coast and think that you're going to maybe match what we've done, is not enough. You have to give more. You have to do more, because you've been given more, and that's biblical, right? To whom much is given, from him much is required.
My mother used to say that to me all the time, all the time growing up. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's lovely, and I've really great to hear about your family. That has been just a very uplifting story and just adorable. And again, I will pray for you and the dog.
Thank you.
But talking about his biography, your father's biography, you've got a pretty interesting biography yourself. So let's hear a little bit.
Well, I've tried to stay busy.
Yes, you have.
Sure. Well, I, for better or for worse, I've been in politics for my entire adult life, probably because I can't find anything better to do. So, started out at OU as an undergrad. So this is actually a story that connects with my father. The day that I went for orientation, so registering for classes and all of this, my freshman year, my fiance, now my wife, was there with us, and we had a lunch break, and so we're in the quad outside the dorms, and he said, my dad says, Brett, I'm just going to tell you something. I want you to be prepared that you're going to pretty quickly see more liberalism and bureaucracy here than you've ever seen in your life. And I, as an 18-year-old, I was thinking, sure, Dad, whatever. I don't know what you're talking about. My first semester, I got a real quick schooling on exactly what he meant, and I got mad. There were professors writing things in the student paper that were just appalling. Just could not reconcile the level of depravity that was being published in the student paper, and so I decided, well, someone's got to speak out and say something about these things, and if not me, then who? So I got active, started writing in the student paper, got active in student politics, and very quickly ended up running the campaign for a friend of mine for student body president. Got involved with college Republicans, ended up being among a group of gentlemen that founded the first conservative student paper at OU. So David Borden was not a fan of us. We were a thorn in his side.
Oh, no.
That was a lot of fun. Yeah. So that's what got me started in politics. And I realized that, I liked it, and this is something that could be a lot of fun. And so I decided to go to grad school, initially for law school and School of Government at Regent University, which is a Christian university in Virginia Beach, founded by Pat Robertson. Ultimately dropped the law school portion and stuck with the government portion. Got a master's in public policy, and then decided to go on for my PhD at Catholic University, which played a role in my conversion. Did not finish that PhD because Rebecca came along, and we decided that raising a family in DC was probably not the best idea. So that's what brought us back home and plugged back into all things politics. And I've done everything since. I've run PACs, I've done campaigns. I've done everything except lobbying until the church came knocking and said, we need you to be the lobbyist for the church.
Interesting. Well, so let's jump off on another topic here. And
sure.
So you were talking about, let's just kind of lay some groundwork, because I think people, one thing that people may be tuning in to see, because I know we've got quite a few watching live this morning. One of the things I think that people are tuning in to talk about it, or hear you talk about, is this.
Yes.
And this is probably going to be a little bone of contention between us here.
Sure.
In just the nicest way. But you obviously, when we were talking about your girls and your family, I mean, you're a big school choice proponent. But I want to ask you this question.
Yes.
Because I know you've been involved in the movement here in Oklahoma for a long time. So when did school choice, and I'm going to take this out for just a second so people can see my, when did school choice stop being about the state getting out of the way so that more choices, educational choices, can be made available to parents, to school choice being the state being the center of all the choices that are going to end up doling out money to all the things? When did that happen?
That is a fantastic question. It didn't.
Darn right it is.
Am I frozen?
No.
You guys.
Oh, you are.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you're back.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So, very, very great question. I don't think that's stopped being the case. I think that all the iterations of school choice that we're seeing play out here in Oklahoma and across the country, in my view, and my colleagues in the school choice movement may have a different opinion, so I'm speaking for myself.
Okay.
I think are part of a continuum, or let's call it a spectrum, of options and tactics and strategies, all pulling toward one end, and that is what I call decoupling private schooling from public funding. The problem, as we know from an economic sense, is that, well, let me back up. In a free enterprise system, one of the things that we enjoy in a free enterprise system is that anytime a provider of a service or a product drops the ball and isn't able to provide a quality product or service, you've got a competitor that's ready to take up the slack and start providing a better service. And that's competition. That's what we enjoy here in the US. And I think it's a great thing. Competition has always ended up resulting in higher quality and lower pricing.
Well, and it's also politically changed things, like Target, for example.
Oh, sure.
Target is the perfect example of not only the free enterprise system, but a way to pressure free enterprise politically. So
that's right.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's a great point. Without free enterprise, we wouldn't be able to seek alternatives, which we have. We've stopped shopping at Target and we get our groceries elsewhere. So that's one of the virtues of a free enterprise system, except when you have a monopoly situation, which we have had for the better part of 150 years in the U.S., and that is particularly government-sponsored monopolies are essentially immune to the principles of free enterprise, and that's a problem. The only solution to that is to break up that monopoly, and the reason why that monopoly exists is because of the tie between what we call public money, which, I dispute the term, but public money and public education. Because there is that inextricable link there, then you have those market forces that don't come to play. It makes it very difficult for a competing enterprise, an education enterprise, to come in and offer an alternative, because parents are forced to fork out dollars out of their own pocket to accommodate those options because of that monopoly. So at the end of the day, the goal is to decouple public money from public schools. And so we have a lot of ways to do that. So at the end of the day, what we want is dollars remaining in the pockets of parents so that they can choose to send those dollars where they want. Whether they will is their option, but they should have that option. The dollars should never be taken from them in the first place. That's also a taxation question. It's a pretty dynamic question. So that's the ultimate goal. So the question is, well, it's not a question of principle so much as it is tactics. What are the best tactics to get us to that point? And so the religious charter angle is one of the angles, among others, including tax credits, which have recently been passed into law in Oklahoma, obviously. ESAs, vouchers, scholarships, all of them are sort of different arrows in the quiver, aiming at that target to decouple public dollars from public schooling so that you have a full-blown competitive educational market. So parents are in control, and parents ultimately are the single deciding factor in where their kids go to school and whether their education needs are met.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there, and I'm going to read. This is from the Catholic News Agency, so I didn't just pick a secular paper for this.
Sure.
And it says the state of Oklahoma approved the country's first ever religious charter school on Monday. The move will allow public funds to pay the tuition of children attending an online Catholic school run by the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City and the Diocese of Tulsa. So now here's my question to you, Brett.
Sure.
So you just said the whole idea was to uncouple public funding from education, and yet really what you did here, in our view, is that you doubled down.
Yeah, and that's what it looks like, except that once we have full-blown universal education, then we ultimately won't need charter schools. So go ahead. Okay,
but doesn't your argument predicate on something happening first that really in the nature of everything that we've seen in public schools in the last 50 years, particularly, let's just talk about the last 50 years, it's getting more publicly funded. It's not at all coming back. It's not, I mean, and you know this, Brad, and you would agree with me because you just basically said the same thing, that government really only expands.
And they,
right.
Don't care how much money they spend, because just this last session where they passed the school choice and I think tacked money with that, and then they also were patting themselves on the back for the biggest education budget in the history of Oklahoma, and Republicans were patting themselves on the back about that.
So I think you can see that we're beyond cynical about this whole thing, because if we were going to do it the way that you're suggesting, then it makes way more common sense to say, you know what, we're not going to fund, we're going to back up on our funding. We're going to back up. What you've done is double down on everything. So you're saying one thing and then doing completely the opposite of what you're saying, at least from what it looks like to us.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense that that's the way it appears. What we're trying to do again is decouple that public funding from public schools by forcing competition, and we have to force competition. So what happens is, in an ideal world, we're never going to be in an ideal world, but what we see happening is ultimately when you give a multiplicity of options to parents where they're not forced to pay for this stuff out of their own pocket, but it's being publicly funded, they're going to take advantage of those options, because as we all know, traditional brick and mortar public schools are failing dismally. When parents have options, then they're going to take advantage of those options. But the only way we give them those options is by publicly funding it on the front end. But then what happens is you're going to see one of two things, and we're already seeing this in Arizona, for instance. And this is going to be on a case-by-case basis, but the local school districts are either going to wither and die, or they're going to force to change by competing and improving their standards. In either case, what's going to happen is the parents are in control, and when they're in control, ultimately they're going to be able to demand that their dollars remain with them through tax cuts. And we're already seeing this kind of rhetoric coming out of the governor's office. We need to give dollars back to the taxpayers so they are the ultimate deciders on where that money goes. But you can't do that until you give them a multiplicity of options so that they can demonstrate that they want other options. Because right now, 700,000 students in Oklahoma are going to public schools. Most Oklahomans don't have options. They can't afford the options. And so they don't have the ability to demonstrate that they want something else. The only way we're going to be able to demonstrate to the public that parents want something else is to give them an avenue to make that choice. And so again, tax credits, ESAs, vouchers, all these avenues are ways for them to demonstrate that on the front end, to say, look, if you allow them to say no to traditional public schools, they will. Once they demonstrate that, then we can say, okay, look, public funding to public schools isn't working. Maybe we ought to do it a radically different way. So we have to make that demonstration first. So that's why it looks like we're going in the wrong direction, when in fact, what we're doing is we're coming full circle.
Okay, so
they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars to get the legislation passed. Why didn't they spend millions of dollars building alternative schools and giving scholarships to kids, to families?
Because they don't want competition. That's an easy question.
No. She's talking about organizations like American Federation for Children or Ed Choice or any of the myriad. And there are really 3 big school choice organizations that get between $8 and $15 million a year. And then what they do is they turn around and they pump that money back into lobbying. And Julie and I have always made the point that if you really wanted school choice, then you would take between that $8 and $15 million that you're collecting every year from not just, people who are donating, but big organizations like Walmart and the Brothers and all that kind of stuff. Why are they funneling it into legislation instead of creating these schools or creating private schools because here's the thing, Brett, and you and I are going to have a throwdown on this.
Okay. I'm Irish Catholic, so I don't mind a good brawl.
Oh, that's true. Well, I never was, but I just was always a brawler. As a matter of fact, my T-shirt today is one my sister gave me, and it says, "Don't make me go all Beth Dutton on you." So for people who watch Yellowstone, you get that. I was actually a teacher. Mom and I both were a teacher at the very first charter school in Oklahoma, Independence Charter Middle School. And when that started, Mom had taught in the public school system for years, and she had taught gifted and talented. And by years, I mean like 30. And she had watched it go from, being a pretty good system to just being in the toilet. And it all had to do with administration. She would try to keep her classes the same, but, there would be new laws passed, or the administration would eventually, what ended up happening was you couldn't keep control of your own classroom, because if you went to the, principal and said, hey, this is happening, they would kowtow to the parents who were coming in and going, well, she did this or she did that. And so everything, from discipline on just started, sorry, we're having some contracting work done in the house if you're hearing banging.
No, you're good.
And it, it just kind of went downhill. Well, when we were teaching at Independence, Mom and I saw the very same thing. We started out with high expectations, high standards, and then all of a sudden it was more important, that the parents were getting upset about whatever we were doing. And so all of a sudden we didn't have the ability to run the school the way the charter said that we should be running the school in the first place. And when you go out, Brett, and you look at the Oklahoma Report Card website and you look at the charter schools and how well they're doing compared to public schools, I'm sorry, but except for maybe in terms of safety, maybe kids are a little safer maybe at a charter school. They're not doing any better than a public school. So so Brett, my argument to you is government isn't free enterprise. Government cannot provide competition. It simply cannot. So if you think that creating all this choice with public money is going to create something better than we have, I'm here to tell you, just personally, from what I saw at a charter school and from what you can see on the Oklahoma School Report Card website, that answer is no.
Sure. I get what you're saying. Let me wax economist here for a minute. And we see examples of this in Oklahoma and across the country, where government has essentially broken up utilities, for instance, and privatized utilities, where that has been successful, but it took government action to do these kinds of things. We look at the existence of Bricktown, the fact that we have the Thunder. It took the government and private enterprise to partner to get these things to happen. I know private-public partnerships are controversial on the center right, but sometimes those things require some, let me use the oyster as a metaphor here, some some seed, some grain of sand that we don't tolerate in order to create the pearl. Because otherwise what we're going to get stuck with is this burgeoning monopoly that's never going to die. And it's the 800-pound gorilla that's killing education across the country. We have to privatize. We have to put money back in the parents' hands. The question is not whether we should do that. The question is how. It's a strategic, tactical question. And we think that by forcing the state to give more options, even if it is publicly funded, will give parents the opportunity to demonstrate again that we want something else. And when that is made abundantly clear, then we'll have no other option but to fully fund it by giving the money back to the parents in the first place, letting them keep their own money. For that reason, I'm also not a fan of the income tax. When I was at OU, I was actually the state director for Americans for Fair Taxation. I don't believe in preemptive taxation. I think we ought to retain our own dollars that we've worked hard for and be allowed to send them where we want. So we need taxation, obviously, to pay for certain things, but I think the sales tax will accomplish that. And so it's not a silver bullet answer. There are a multiplicity of policies that have to take place, but we've got to groom the situation, and it's probably not a good term in this environment, but we have to prepare the environment to receive choice.
Right.
So I think technically it's the way to do it.
Okay. So, and again, I see your point, but it just simply doesn't make any sense to me, because let's look at, well, I was going to say canoe, but apparently I haven't read the latest thing on canoe, but we gave tax incentives to Canoe, which is an electric car manufacturer, to come here to Oklahoma. And then right after we gave the money to them, then they went out of business, essentially. There was a big shakeup in the company, and then they went out of business. And I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if they've organized or what they're doing right now, but it was the same way with Solara under
under Obama,
under Obama. I can't even think of his name. Isn't that funny? The things you really despise. Sorry.
You try to forget certain things.
You do. Put them out of your mind. But it was like Solara, because we gave all of this public money to them, and then all of a sudden they just went belly up and took our dollars with us. So you're never going to ever, and I'll just be frank, you are never, ever going to convince either Julia or I that any form of public subsidy on any way is going to either instill competition or make anything better, because you've got way more examples about where it hasn't than it has. But here's the thing that I don't understand, and here's my question for you. So really what would fix the problem is legislation that said, we're going to start removing funding from, this school, or we're going to back off, funding, and that, you guys are going to have to figure out how to kind of, make your own way, instead of just giving them, money carte blanche, which is what you're doing. If you go to Edmond Memorial in Edmond, for example, which is a public high school, for those of you who aren't from here, you go there, they have taken up a full city block with the whole, they have a soccer field across the street, and and all of these taxpayers are paying for through bonds that were more than likely conduit financing, which isn't legal really anyway. And those bonds go back to indebting your property, which means that if you somehow can't afford your property tax, your property that you've paid for is now taken away from you over education, and just flat taken away from you, and now you don't have your property anymore. If we were seeing something in the realm of, we don't have these huge, because sports can be done outside of education. Anybody who homeschools understands that. There are homeschool football teams, there are homeschool soccer teams, there are homeschool, and parents pay for all of that out of their pocket. The only reason, there is no reason for schools to have these billion-dollar soccer, football stadiums where we're all only paying attention to sports, and yet a kid can't read the plays.
Right. No, that you're spot on. I think you've hit the nail on the head. We've got to create accountability in the system so that these schools will respond to the demands of parents. That's bottom line. As you know,
but be specific, because just handing them out money isn't doing that. So be specific,
100%.
Brett. How do you feel like that's going to happen?
And Michael has made the point that in Arizona, where they've already done school choice, the ones that are taking advantage of it most often are the ones that are already in private schools. So
Sure.
you're not, and again, why not just build other schools and fund? Let kids come there, give scholarships.
Yeah, so there are two questions here. Let me hit back on the accountability question. Unfortunately, hard-hitting, far-reaching policies are less likely to pass because that's the nature of democracy. I mean, we complain about gridlock in Congress, but that's actually a feature, not a bug, because we don't want the pendulum of public will and public opinion to swing too far. Otherwise, we get people like Joe Biden in office. That's bad enough.
But that just happened.
It just happened. I know. We don't want more of that. So gridlock is a feature built into democracy so that we can manage change. And we don't like it for the most part. But we can take advantage of the fact that we can slowly make changes that have the best outcome. So we need to push as hard as we can for more accountability measures for public schools so that we say, look, if you're going to take this public money, which ultimately is dollars from parents' pockets, you have to perform. You have to provide a product that the parents want. And if you can't, there are going to be consequences. And we're right on the cusp of the demand from parents is overwhelming. We're at an historic position right now to make those kinds of demands in ways that we could never have done that in the entire history of Oklahoma. And this is happening across the board. So these are the kind of things that we're talking about, but we have to work within the I guess the flavor palette of the elected officials who are representing constituents all over the state. You might have a group of rural legislators that want certain policies, but urban legislators want something else. You've got to find some compromise in between. Otherwise, nothing gets done. And so that's how we end up having these incremental moves. But to the second question, I think, again, to get back to economics, this is a question of supply and demand. We know the demand is there. Polling has told us over and over again across the board, across the partisan spectrum, parents want more choice. The problem is because we have a monopolistic system, they don't have the avenues to take advantage of to make their demand known because there's the dollar impediment. They don't have the money in their pocket to spend on those options. So we have to create those options, give them the money, allow them to demonstrate that the demand is there. And then suddenly there's an immense amount of pressure on the public schools. When we see new schools opening up, and we're going to see that, I promise you the next 5 years, we're going to see new schools explode. We're going to see existing private schools explode as well. We already have wait lists in Catholic schools anyway. We're going to have a massive wait list because of these tax credits. And the scholarships and the Opportunity Scholarship Fund has been immensely successful. Do we want public money going into these schools directly? No, it's not ideal, but it's the path to getting these options and these new schools opened up so that parents can demonstrate the demand. And then we can say, why are all the people leaving the public schools, folks? We can say to the public school system, why is everybody leaving? They want sports, and now they have options. They want quality education, now they have options. They want extracurricular activities, now they have options. Why are they leaving? Because you're not giving them quality education. Something's wrong with your system. You better change or you're dead. We're in a position now in the next few years where we can make those kinds of demands where we couldn't before because we haven't had in 100 years of Oklahoma history the ability to point to those other options to say, look, all the parents are leaving. Now we'll be able to do that. And so, again, it's a spectrum of options that we're giving to the parents that unfortunately is going to have to be publicly funded on the front end. But on the back end, we expect that through tax cuts, we'll be able to say, we don't need to publicly fund these anymore. We'll just leave the money in the parents' pockets and they'll make the choice themselves.
Okay, I'm going to
What do you think, though, that the government isn't going to start saying, oh, now that you've got our money, you have to do this, you have to do that.
Sure.
You have to make this because that's what public schools do. I mean,
Right.
The problem with public schools is the federal government telling them what they can and cannot do.
Right, and I think that's the most important concern. That's a concern that we have to have across the board. And as Catholic Church, we've had that concern for 500 years plus. Because again, we've been dealing with the government on hospitals and Catholic charities and similar institutions. So it's always a concern. We've had to fight the Biden administration recently on school lunches, where they've tried to implement these policies where you have to do all these things, these woke policies if you want to continue taking federal money on school lunches, which we're not going to abide by. We'd rather kill the program than change our principles. So we have to contend with these things. It's a very real concern. Thankfully, in Oklahoma, it's less of a concern than it is in other states. We have put policies in place, what I call firewalls, and we continue to put firewalls in place to protect particularly religious, but private institutions across the board, so that the state can't put its tentacles into their operations. A case in point is a bill that we proposed and got passed, Senate Bill 404, which essentially takes the language right out of the Supreme Court's Carson decision last year and puts it in a state statute. It essentially says, if you're a religious entity that wants to partake of some state program, you can't be discriminated against because you're religious. And that means not just participation, but operation as well. So the state can't come in and go, okay, now you have to do X, Y, and Z if you want to continue participating in this program. That is a violation of the First Amendment. And we have other iterations. We saw a couple of years ago when Joey Hoffmeister rejected a couple of Christian schools that were applying to take part in the LNH program, that she was slapped down both by the legislature and the AG's office. It was both a violation of state rules and of state statute. So we have these firewalls in place, and we're going to continue to put these protections in place so that we can continue to expand and operate new private schools. But we can't sit on our laurels and take that for granted. We've got to remain vigilant, because it's a concern that we have to keep top of mind. Government is what it is, and the nature of government is to expand, as you said, and to try to overreach. That's just, it's human nature. It's not just endemic to government, it's endemic to big corporations as well, as we saw with Target. So it's a fact of human nature. We have to continue to put these protections in place because we want these new schools to open and to flourish.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to one thing before what Julia just asked, the question she just asked, because we're going to talk more about that in just a second.
Sure. And
just remind you that, I'm not a spring chicken. I know I look 30, but, I'm actually double that. But back in the day, even they started having magnet schools. And I want to say that was probably more like 35 years ago that they started on magnet schools. And they've increased, the government hasn't, increased in allowing charter schools and that kind of thing. My argument to you, Brett, is that parents in Oklahoma, and I can tell you that we have parents who have told us this over and over again, and I published it on our blog. I mean, parents from other states have been moving to Oklahoma. I know I have one who lives just on the other side of my neighbor, came from California so that she could they're Catholic, and they came here to homeschool their kids. So the thing of it is that in Oklahoma, parents have a myriad of choices. You can homeschool, you can go to your neighborhood public school. Now you can transfer from your neighborhood public school to another public school if you want to.
Theoretically.
You have charter schools that you can go to. You have an online charter school that you can go to. And you've got a myriad of charter schools that you could spend money on if you wanted to, that are online. So in Oklahoma, parents have way more choices than any other state. I've actually looked it up, because if you go to edchoice.org, they keep all of the statistics on this. And I've actually done research on the statistics. So Oklahoma by far has the most school choice. So we don't need to provide parents any more choice. And my argument to you is if you're a church and you decide you want a tax credit, you have now gone from being a free, independent religious organization to an organization sponsored by the state. And I can argue it on this fact, that we know that there were states that actually closed churches down during COVID. And they said they had that ability because that particular church was indebted to the state by taking a state income tax exemption. So
Yeah.
if you really want freedom, it has to be independent of the government, period. And if you want to fix government schools, you put the onus on that back into the laps of the legislators who keep telling us it's okay to steal from our neighbor so long as we're going to be putting our kids in a private school. It's not okay to steal from your neighbor ever. And this $7,500 that you're going to get back of your money per child is ludicrous. I mean, Brett, you can't possibly tell me that's a tax credit. That's socialism, because you don't put in, let's say you have 3 kids and you're going to take a $7,500 deduction and put them in a private school for 3 kids. There's no possible way, unless you made $2 billion, that you paid that much money in Oklahoma taxes.
Right.
There's no point. So it's not a tax credit.
Sure. Well, so you addressed a couple of things in there. The tax exempt question is a great point. And that's actually something that's being litigated in federal courts right now. That ultimately is a violation of the First Amendment. The Biden administration is arguing that tax exemption is a federal economic benefit, and therefore, as you said, they have the right to impose all kinds of strings. Obviously, that's not our view. These are things that we have to contend with. Again, the problem in our form of government is that oftentimes the private market isn't sufficient to sort of stem certain activity and certain choices without giving incentives to the consumers. In this case, in education, are the parents. So this is not a long-term play. This is a short-term play to spark that innovation, because yeah, you're right. We do have lots of options as parents, but if we don't have the economic wherewithal to take advantage of it, then we might as well not have the options at all. And that's the problem. It's that most parents, by and large, 95% of them, don't have the economic wherewithal. So the tax credit, you're correct in part. It's a tax credit for those in the upper economic strata. So essentially 150,000 and higher, it is a tax credit in the sense that they're going to get a benefit to the degree that they pay taxes. But for those that are in lower incomes, of course, it's not a tax credit. It is essentially a voucher, and we need to just call it that because that's what it is. It's run very similarly to the EITC. But we have to remember that the state's already spending roughly $13,000 of taxpayer money on each individual student anyway. So they're getting a fraction of that to essentially say, look, we recognize that you need more options, but you can't presently afford them. So we have all these options out there, but you're still stuck in the public school. Your kids are trapped in the public school because you lack the funds. We're going to give you the funds to take advantage of those options until such time as it's been made clear the public options are no longer viable. We're just now going to leave the money in your hands, and we're going to give it sufficient tax cuts equivalent to $13,000 that the state otherwise would spend, and we're going to let you keep that money, and you can spend it where you want. But we have to get from here to there, and the only way we get there is in my view, tactically, by giving the money in these forms to the parents so they can then direct it where they want. That's the unfortunate nature.
Yeah, but see, that's the problem, is that you say, no. We want to put government in its place. We want to restrict government, and you say all the right things, but then you have this big but. But we're gonna,
sure.
But we're gonna, and I'm not talking about your physique, so don't take that personally. But I'm just saying you have this big but in there, which is we don't like any of this, but we're going to do it for now because that's gonna. May I remind you? Wait. May I remind you about Social Security?
Yes. No, you're right.
May I remind you? So none of what you're saying, you say all the right things and you stick this big but in there and say, but somehow it's going to work this time because we're going to do this.
Well, we have to remember politics is the art of the possible. And I know I'm using the word but a lot, but listen, I mean, we all spend plenty of time at the Capitol, okay? We know that what we really ideally would love to put in place oftentimes is just not possible. And so, ideally, I'd love for the state to say, you know what, we're going to give every taxpayer in Oklahoma a $13,000 income tax cut. And we're going to put that money, which is, again, how much the state spends per pupil on education, we're going to put it back in the taxpayer's pocket. That would be great. And then you all spend it wherever you want. Send your kids to whatever school you want. That's not going to happen. That's never going to happen. So the problem is that what is ideal, what is possible, almost never meet. We have to work within the realm of possibility. And oftentimes that means we have to implement policies that we don't really like, we don't really want, but they're means to an end. And so tactically, it's a question. I mean, we saw this in the American Revolution. George Washington retreated a number of times. That was not a desirable situation, but he retreated because tactically he understood it put him in a better position to flank, oftentimes, the British forces and ultimately win the war. And that's probably the best metaphor I can come up with. We have to do tactical retreats, tactical feints, and other maneuvers to win the war. This is a long-term game, and it's not something that we're going to win short-term with a policy that is just ideal, but not reasonable, not practical. We have to deal with the facts on the ground and the legislators that we have in the building at the time.
So I think we just fundamentally disagree with you on principle.
Well,
no, not on principle, on tactics.
Every single thing that you're talking about doing, but without public funds. And the reason I say that is because there's currently wait lists at just about every single private school available. And you have to, when your kid is born, you better get on their list. I mean, so all we need more buildings. We need more people that can run the place, but we don't need to have, we've got people that intend to pay for it, that can put their kids in private schools, but we have more private schools available.
But we have to remember that those wait lists are made up of people from the 5% income bracket. The remaining 95% of Oklahomans who are not in those income brackets would also be on those wait lists, but they can't afford to be. There's no way they can't justify being on those wait lists. And we have to think about them.
Okay, but one thing, do you remember the old axiom about you give a man a fish versus you teach the man to fish?
Yeah.
So what we're doing with all of these social programs, and you've actually virtually said that this is a social program, this tax credit. I mean, you virtually said that. So what we're doing with all of these social programs, well, but you did say that you would have to admit, which is big of you, that it's a voucher for a lot of people because they're not putting in that money. But the point of the matter is that it used to be, Brett, that we were okay with the fact, because I can't tell you the number of times in the Bible that Jesus said, hey, we're to take care of the poor, but all we're supposed to do is just lower the bar to make sure they have access to being able to do it themselves. We don't give it to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that's a great point. Let me point to, I mentioned the EITC earlier. You could juxtapose the EITC, which is a Republican policy, by the way, with any sort of welfare program, Medicare, Medicaid, and I'll use Medicaid for instance, and its local iteration in Sooner Care. We have two options, and maybe there's a third that we haven't considered, but those are the two options on the board right now. We can continue giving people welfare, and we know that is the equivalent to the handing the man a fish, right? You can continue handing a man a fish. And
we know it doesn't work. They don't go back to work. Most of them don't go back to work. Doesn't even work.
Which is why the Republican Party developed the EITC as an alternative, where you give, and the tax credit, the education tax credit, essentially is the EITC for education. You're giving people, you're giving them back their tax dollars when they haven't paid any tax dollars in the first place. But what you're doing is you're giving them an on-ramp and incentive to go out and get better employment, to get better education. And that has been a wildly successful alternative to Medicaid and to Sooner Care and other forms of welfare. If those are the only two options on the board, then you choose the lesser of the evils. Now, again, maybe there's a third option, but right now, those are the options on the board that can pass the legislature and did pass the state legislature. We have those means in place so that we can give people a better option to get them in a better economic position so that they become producers and not takers. And so the same principles at play in education. We've got to give people an incentive to go out and choose alternative education options, again, so we can demonstrate that the public schools are not viable. We know this in principle.
But we
But in
we know
practice, we
that
don't.
just from looking at it. We don't need to do that. But let me just point out this, so that we got a bunch of gear funds, which were just printed money from the federal government, and
Right.
then they were handed over to a group of people, including the state superintendent, who was at the time the Secretary of Education and running ECHO, and who didn't disperse those funds properly, so that 670 something families didn't even, that needed the funds, didn't even get the funds because other families were prioritized. That's number one. And then number two, what ended up happening was that a lot of the money that was given away, many hundreds of thousands of dollars, people misused. So I mean, I get that but this is talking points, in my opinion, and I hope I'm not trying to, like, I'm arguing, but you and I will still be friends after this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because I'm passionate about it. I will argue.
Every day, so.
But the point of the matter is that really, honestly, Brad, if you just listen to yourself and replay this, it's like a talking point that we've heard over and over again. But when you stack up what's actually going on, all it's doing is helping people who are in a position that they can be helped politically, or, or whatever. It's not, and we're already at 10:14, which I already warned you we were going to run over. So, but let's talk about this. Let's talk about this really fast. So our other argument is if you, because Julie and I and our whole organization, we're all Christians, and unapologetically so. We love Jesus. Right. We want people to be in Christian schools, but we don't want them to be in Christian schools on the public dime. I don't care what the First Amendment says. And the reason why is this. Arizona is opening an LGBT middle school, and Christians need to pray. Well, you cite, and so many of the school choice people cite Arizona as the best place in the whole world for school choice. It's not. You need to go look at the stats, and you need to talk to people who live there. I have a number of homeschoolers that have actually immigrated from Arizona to Oklahoma because Arizona is getting so screwed up with all of these school choice programs. And one of the things that they're getting screwed up on now is because there's so much public money going to other schools. Now, if I were an Arizona taxpayer, my tax dollars would be used to fund an LGBT middle school. Now, I don't care what you do on your own time. I would adjure you to find Jesus because, that's my thing. But I don't care what you do on your own time. But you can't take my tax dollars and either make me like it or make me fund it. And that was the whole argument behind Planned Parenthood and the Catholic Church in the first place, right? You can't take these tax dollars and then make me fund your abortions because I'm completely religiously opposed. Right. Well, even though I don't care what you do, I am religiously opposed to my tax dollars being spent on an LGBT middle school.
No, yeah, I'm opposed as well. We don't want tax dollars going to all kinds of things that we oppose, abortion or anything else. What we have to remember, and we've heard protests from the AG's office against our charter school along these lines. We've got news that a school of Satanism may pop up. What we have to remember is that economic principles still are at play here, whether it's a charter school or a private school or any other iteration of school choice. Demand is going to dictate what happens with that school. And if there aren't enough students to attend a school, that school is going to close. So whether it's a charter school that concentrates on human sacrifice, or it's a private school taking vouchers that is going to teach woke principles and LGBT whatever, they still have to demonstrate demand. And if there's not enough demand, then that school is going to close. And that's the brilliant quality of the free enterprise system in the context of school choices, that at the end of the day, schools that are doing good things, that are teaching our kids, ideally, principles and morals and virtue, are going to succeed. The fruit's going to be on the tree. And those that aren't, including public schools, are going to cease to exist. The problem is that that's not going to work its way out in the time frame that we want. But that's always true of the free enterprise. Bad businesses, bad actors don't close immediately. We have to wait for economic principles and economic gears to work their way through the system before we get a more ideal system. And so we're going to have to contend with those situations. That, that if we have a fully free enterprise system governing school choice where there are no public dollars, we might also get an LGBT school. Now, they're taking advantage of tax dollars indirectly because they've got roads going to them, they've got public safety that's protecting them. You might have a police resource officer that's there. So we're never going to be in a situation where there aren't at least indirect benefits going to undesirable institutions. That's just not going to exist in America. But we can rely on the free enterprise to at least mete out some of those things and to work the wrinkles out of the system so at the end of the day, the best actors rise to the top. That's what we can rely on. It's never going to be a perfect system. But by introducing free enterprise principles, yes, even with government money, it gets us there as close as we can get. That's my view.
Free enterprise and government money are opposite.
It's an oxymoron, Brett.
I don't think it's an oxymoron. I think there's a lot of tension there. Again, I point to Bricktown. Bricktown wouldn't exist without government money.
Okay.
But it's a very successful operation.
But okay, so what if it doesn't?
What if it doesn't what?
What if it doesn't exist?
Well, I mean, lots of things can still happen, but they don't happen as quickly. And this is not always true. It's not a law.
Take your money forcefully. I mean, that's
for sure.
If you have an idea and you can't raise the money to do your idea, you just go rob your neighbor. Is that okay? That's not okay.
No. And I'm not saying that we need government money in every sphere of free enterprise. I think in most spheres of free enterprise, we don't need government money. Government money can be strategic to initiate new projects or new endeavors or new markets. So, we talked about Solyndra, obviously an utter failure, but Tesla wouldn't exist without government money. And yet now we have this explosion of electric vehicles, which is a new market that's being subsidized by the federal government, which is forcing competition. You needed a government infusion of incentive to get over that hump because supply and demand wasn't getting it across the finish line. Now, at the end of the day, free enterprise ought to be governing that exclusively, not government. I don't enjoy the fact that federal government's imposing these mandates where you have to have so many vehicles that are electric and so forth. That's unconstitutional. Period.
But that's the way government works.
No, you're right. You're right. And so taking an all or none approach to government funding is not a smart idea in any way. It's also true for free enterprise. Free enterprise isn't always sufficient. You look at the distribution system we have in America. It's the best in the world, bar none. We have the best distribution system in the country. But you don't have that distribution system at play unless you have the federal government building the highway system. Infrastructure.
But that's but see, we're mixing all these metaphors, for lack of a better term, because it's constitutional to build roads. I mean, that's if we want to operate on the Constitution, then it's constitutional to be roads under the Commerce Clause. Well, I mean, good God, it's a better argument of building roads under the Commerce Clause than providing health care, for Pete's sakes.
Sure.
But
sure.
Beyond that, let me just say this, because this is where I think this argument where you and I and Julia kind of get off on a divergent track here. So you just used as your example for, what great free enterprise is for electric cars. Right?
Well,
okay.
That it should be.
So
it should be.
Let's break down electric cars here. Number one, where do electric cars get fuel?
Oh, sure. Natural gas and coal.
At coal. Exactly. In Oklahoma, it's coal. So you plug in your electric car in coal in Oklahoma, and basically the electricity that's fueling your car is pumping as much coal into the atmosphere as me turning on my air conditioner. Sure. So that whole thing is just dumb. And then, hold on, I'm not even finished with this yet. And then the second thing is it's full of batteries, like thousands of pounds of batteries, which we have no idea how to get rid of. You can't really put them in a landfill because they have all this lithium in there and it'll just pollute the water and everything else. Then number 3, as an ex-mayor, I can tell you one of the things that we worried about was what that damage of those huge cars on regular, rural roads do, because they're so heavy, they ruin the so what I just gave you 3 really good reasons why electric cars are a boondoggle and not the brainchild of some free enterprise thing. And yet your biggest thing was, hey, isn't this great? We subsidize this.
I'm not. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not extolling the virtues of electric cars. I'm just giving an example of new industries that couldn't have gotten started without.
No, but that's my point. But you're missing my point. My point is that's exactly why we shouldn't be giving these people money anyway. We should not be using public funds to incentivize anything, because it ruins your free enterprise system, because you're always free enterprise. But here's the thing. If I have an electric car company and I don't qualify for those incentives, now this guy has gotten a better chance at succeeding than I did. And that absolutely scuttles your whole free enterprise system.
Sure. And we can debate the mechanics of free enterprise and what is desirable and what's not.
For how long?
Well,
it's 1024.
Until Jesus comes back. I mean, there are plenty of examples. The fact that we're using the internet here to do this podcast wouldn't exist if it weren't for a government infusion of incentives and infrastructure, right? That's not explicitly entitled in the Constitution, but here we are. Now you've got private enterprise that is running the internet, and we get all kinds of benefits from internet-based operations, and we use it for education. But it wouldn't have happened had the DoD not done the research they did. So, and we could talk about all kinds of telecom, railroads, again, a lot of infrastructure things that are not explicitly spelled out in the Constitution. But there are other industries as well that wouldn't exist without some sort of incentive from the federal government. Again, it's not desirable, but we can't say carte blanche, all federal incentives are bad, and therefore we need to rely exclusively on the free enterprise system, because in some cases, especially in new industries, it's just not sufficient.
Yeah, but see, I completely disagree with that altogether, because, my argument is, and I'm pretty sure Julie's is the same argument, because we've argued this together for years on the same side. And that is, if you're not going to do something, I know this is like a really stupid example, so please accept that up front.
I'll take it.
But let's just say that you're like, okay, sugar is bad for me. I'm not going to eat any sugar. And I've just decided that I'm not going to eat any sugar, right? Mm-hmm. You either don't eat any sugar or you don't eat any. I mean, you can't just go, okay, well, today I'm going to have some ice cream just because, you're eating sugar. I mean, and like I said, it's a stupid example, but you can't just do something halfway. We always talk about, there's so many things anymore, Brett, and that are either or. I mean, that are black and white. I mean, and I think and I think you would at least agree with us on this, that part of the reason why our society is so creepy and weird right now is because we forgot that things are black and white.
Sure. Yeah. And to take your metaphor, I think it is apt. Rather than saying,
I thought it was stupid, so thank you.
No. Rather than asking whether I should eat sugar or not, I would be in favor of asking whether there are alternatives that are less bad. Ultimately, the ideal is to eat no sugar, but obviously we know in the food that we have, it's nearly impossible. But what if I downgraded to monk fruit? What if I downgraded to?
Because monk fruit tastes terrible, frankly.
Well, sure. I mean, but we know this as Christians. Right. Oftentimes the thing we want the most is the worst.
Yeah.
So downgraded monk fruit or coconut-based sweetener or whatever. It's less bad, but it's not ideal. Ideally, we should eat no sugar. But we're human beings, and doing anything cold turkey almost always fails. So sometimes we have to take the less bad in order to get us to where we want to be ideally, and that takes time and sacrifice. Again, we're dealing in the human realm where the human will is the thing we have to contend with, and that's not easy.
Well, let's close out here because we're at 10:27, and I know at some point you're going to want to do something, and I probably need to. So we were talking before we came on air about the fact that Michael and I did a whole hour on or more on Satan clubs that are popping up around. And we actually do have, and this is sad, but I mean, it's true. And you can actually check me on it just by doing some basic research. We have a growing satanic group here in Oklahoma, and they're very involved in the, say what, Julia?
It's been around for a long time.
It has, but it's actually growing, and they're very involved in the LGBT QRSTV issues in Oklahoma. But the one thing that does concern us, because it's such a problem nationwide, that Jesse Waters actually had, what's his name again? Tell me, Lucian
Greaves, or
Lucian Greaves. Jesse Waters actually had Lucian Greaves, who's the head of the Satanic Church of America or something, on to talk about satanic after school clubs, because, you know, it's becoming a thing. And you mentioned kind of off the cuff, you know, well, that Drummond had said something about, you know, well, we could get a satanic school out of it. Well, here's the thing. I mean, we can all, you know, there's a lot of wishful thinking that's gone on during this podcast. And I'm not sure if it's on both sides necessarily, but I'm definitely sure that it's on yours. I'm sorry. But
I appreciate the candor.
Sorry.
I prefer optimism, but we'll go with it.
Yeah, well, I think we passed the mark for optimism, and now we're going to have to just guard our souls, you know, our eternal souls, like crazy. And one of the ways that I think we need to do that is to think about the fact that, you know, unfortunately, if we're going to use public funds to fund a Catholic school, and obviously I'm fine with a Catholic school, but I don't want Lucian Greaves, who has already said, by the way, he did say, and I don't have it up right now, but he did say that he was thinking about putting, or that they should think about putting, that's what he said. They should think about putting a satanic school here, is what he said. Not that they were, but that they should think about it. Sure. So I'm going to tell you, Brett, if they come up with satanic school here and then apply for public funds to run that, then the First Amendment also says that they have to be granted those public funds to run that school. And when that happens, I am going to come and probably punch you in the arm.
That will be warranted. Here's been my response, because I've gotten that question a lot. And number one, A.G. Drummond is just wrong. The problem here is that it's a theoretical question that can easily be answered yes, but we don't work in the realm of theory. I can speak specifically to the charter question. The application process for a charter school, and this is certainly going to be true with the new charter board as a result of SB 516, is an arduous application process. I mean, and when I say arduous, it's an understatement. It took well over a year for us to prepare a 400-page application, and that was with 2 Catholic superintendents who've been in the industry for decades to prepare this thing, and it still barely passed by 1 vote. And after we get approved, we've still got to negotiate a successful contract. Then we have to actually operate a school, which is still going to be subject to market principles, meaning parents actually have to want to send their kids there. All of those things would have to be successfully true for a school of Satanism or any other abhorrent type of school before they could receive public funds. And they're just not going to be able to do it. They're not going to be able to get an application together because they have no pedigree in education. They're not going to get a contract because no board's going to contract with them offering certain classes that, would lionize ritual human sacrifice, for instance, which they do. And thirdly, there's going to be near zero demand. I mean, you can't sustain it to school. The public funds are not going to go to a school that has no enrollment. It'll be closed before it opens. So again, in theory, something like that is possible, but in practice, it's near impossible. It's so close to impossible as to be zero.
Well, and I can appreciate you saying that, but I do want to point out that there have been numerous things just in the last 10 years that I think all 3 of us would have said that'll never happen, and it has.
Sure. That's fair. And again, that's why we have to remain vigilant in this process. But again, to go back to the sugar example, we unfortunately don't live in, as much as I would like to, we don't live in a black and white world. This side of heaven, we have to contend with half measures. And if the goal is to get dollars back in the hands of parents so they are making the decisions on their own, then we've got to figure out a way to break the ties and the control that public schools have on our public dollars. And the way to do that, I think, in my view, is to give tons of options to parents and the means with which for them to exercise those options, so they demonstrate that public schools are no longer viable and they have to contend or die.
But it's not, but you're gonna steal from Julia and from me to make that happen.
Well, I don't characterize it as stealing. I characterize it as strategic investment, but I know that I'm borrowing the rhetoric from the other side. So
What if I wanted to invest?
we're investing in parents. We're not investing in institutions.
Right. What did you say, Jules?
Nothing. Keep going.
Okay. Well, one last thing before we get off of here. And this was, and I promise this is going to be the last thing. So I don't know if you know this or not, but I did a whole lot of research on dark money in elections. And as somebody who runs a PAC, I know that you probably more than most people would know, what I was talking about. So one of the things that our organization has been concerned with, from the word go, from the moment, the reason we started in 2008 was because we wanted accountability and transparency in everything that had to do with education, period, end of discussion. And part of the reason why we hate the school choice movement, and I hate to use the word hate because I know as Christians, we're not supposed to hate anything, but I'm just saying, well, I can't think of what, Julia?
We're supposed to hate sin, but go ahead.
Well, that's true. And I don't think we could characterize school choice as sinful, but no matter how I wanted to spin that. But the thing that when I was doing some back research because we did a lot of research on Jake Merrick's election, and he was basically booted out, the school choice movement booted out an extremely good senator, and then was super happy about it and got a not so good senator in his place. Arguably, for sure, but to me, not a very good senator in his place. And one of the things that this was actually from our blog, because the Frontier, who I'm not a huge proponent of Frontier. Sure. I think you're a little lefty for me. So you have to read everything that they say, kind of with a grain of salt. But they did publish an article, Billionaire Philanthropists Pushing Charter Schools and School Vouchers Also Fund Oklahoma Secretaries of Education 6-figure salary. And that was back in last year in May. And, our organization has always been about who's funding who, because just like we're arguing with you right now about who's funding tax credits and where is that money going to go, that's us, that's rope, that's always where that's the foot we've started out on. Sure. And so we started looking at Every Kid Counts, which was an organization that Ryan Walters was the head of before he became before he became
State secretary.
State superintendent.
Superintendent, right. Yeah.
There are way too many S's there to remember what S goes to what word. Okay, so anyway, ECHO was the one that actually was a pass-through arm for the GEAR funds. And there was a real issue with that. Well, so I started looking up ECHO after that, and your name popped up. Secretary of State filings showing that the registered agent was Brett Farley. And I was like, okay, I know Brett Farley, now executive director of the Catholic Conference, and addressed from a post office box at the post office in Covell in Edmond. And so then apparently you worked with Cordon DeCock, who was at the state chamber, and we're not fans of the state chamber either. And Jason Reese, I wish we were better fans of State. But anyway, so what's the deal there? I mean, how did you
Yeah.
get involved in ECHO, and what does any of this mean? And, help us out here so we can shed a little light on that.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you asked. That the original story, if you read through it and all the weaving webs that are put up in that story, it really is just a stream of conspiracy theory, of half truths, and trying to connect dots that don't have any business being connected. So let me go back to the very beginning. You saw a reference to Upward Oklahoma Incorporated,
Yes.
which was a nonprofit that I started with those individuals for the express purpose of training civic leaders, including potential school board candidates. That was supposed to be funded by the Walton Foundation, ultimately did not get a grant, and so it just sat dormant. This goes back, I want to say, 3 years ago. So time frame's now escaping me, but we went on a junket. Some school choice coalition members went on a junket to.
2016 was when Upward Oklahoma was founded, or when it
Right.
was, 2016.
Right. So I want to say back in 2019 was when we went on a trip to Florida to take a look at what some of the groups were doing in Florida for school choice, and there are a number of us there. And so while we were in the airport, we had a conversation just trying to figure out, how do we assess what we've learned here and try to apply this to Oklahoma? And what we quickly realized is we needed kind of an organization that served as a hub for all the various entities and efforts that were going on in Oklahoma, so we can get our state to a place where Florida is, where right now 45% of students in Oklahoma attend a non-traditional school. So be it a charter, be it homeschooling, be it private school, whatever, they're not in a traditional public school, and their test scores have skyrocketed as a result. So we asked ourselves, how do we get there? Well, we need an organization that serves as a hub. We need to start an organization, and so that's where that conversation was. Well, Upper Oklahoma is a dormant nonprofit that was created for something similar. We could just use that operation, since we don't have to go through the filing process for a brand new organization. We could use that. So that was how ECHO was born. It essentially took the shell that was left from Upward and converted it to ECHO, and that's where my role came in. Was I was already on the board for Upward, and all of those individuals got transferred over to ECHO before they were ultimately transferred out, and new members came on board, including Ryan. Since that time, what ECHO has done operationally has not been within my purview, because I haven't been a party to it, whether good or bad. So there's been a lot ascribed to ECHO, I think, that's been unfair. Maybe some of it warranted, I don't know, but the day-to-day operations there have not been part of what I've been doing. So that was the genesis of the organization, and why I have a connection to it at all.
Okay, well, that does make a lot more sense. And actually, I conjectured that in my article. I even just said that, that sometimes this kind of thing happens. But I think that one of the reasons why it's easy for us to kind of fault school choice organizations like, the ones that we talked about earlier,
Sure.
Is because there is a lack of transparency there. I mean, I will say this, Ed Choice, I give them, like, I don't agree with what they do with their money, but I give them 5 stars for, I mean, their 990s their tax filings are perfect. I mean, they're in order. You can see who's donated, I mean, really, they're and their website, it's interesting because they publish everything, the good and bad and the ugly, but they only talk about the good, which is interesting. But that's their organization. But they do. So, I mean, they get however many stars you can get on a rating of stars, just because their transparency is so good. The other one that I just talked about earlier on, there are 2 other great big ones. One that Casey or
American Federation.
Thank you, American Federation for Children. American Federation for Children is another one that they're 990s. I mean, there are a lot of donors that aren't, listed on there. They have a lot of money. Corey DeAngelis actually worked for the United Nations and then later scrubbed that off of the United Nations like he was, and never addressed it, like he was embarrassed about it or something. So, there's a bunch of shrouded in secrecy, not transparent, not completely out there information surrounding these school choice organizations. And it can make, and it does for us, make it seem like there's something else going on. If you can't be upfront about where your money is going or where you're getting your money from, or from where you're getting your money, then there's got to be something wrong there. I mean, you're trying deliberately then to hide something.
Yeah, I obviously can't speak to those organizations and their governance, but
Sure.
I would push back a little bit that a lot of these organizations are supported by major high net worth donors that just don't want their support to be known, and that's true in support of candidates as well oftentimes. And that's one of the reasons that super PACs exist, is because people want to protect their public persona, if they have, especially if they're the principals of public brands, from scrutiny, because as we know, the radical left will take every opportunity they have to try to destroy somebody if they support any sort of even quasi-conservative organization, even a centrist organization. So there's a sense that it's in their best interest to protect those donors' interests by keeping that private. And that's been a mainstay of the American Republic from the get-go, is that people have the right to give their dollars privately and anonymously. So how they use those dollars obviously is up for question, and that's debatable as well. But I do understand why they want to keep those private, just to protect those individuals.
Well, that there's a federal law that says that there is not to be any foreign money in any election in America. I mean, so as far down as city council races, I mean, there is no foreign money. But here's my question to you. If I don't know where that money comes from, how do I know it's not from a foreign country?
Well, you don't, and ultimately that's a problem. Now, but we're talking about the difference between C3, C4, PACs, and super PACs, and the different regulations for each one of those. We know C3 can't give to political efforts. C4s can't do anything electoral. Only PACs and super PACs can. So there's a difference of scrutiny and levels of scrutiny there. But you're right. I mean, that's a valid concern, and we know foreign money does get into elections no matter what kind of regulations put in place.
And we know it did during Obama's election.
Right. The left has taken advantages the Clinton administration has taken money from foreign governments both before and after being in office. There's a long train of that. So those things need to be tightened, of course. But private American money, I think, is a different category. It's a different bucket. And I think it's okay for people to give money anonymously, certainly to a C3. Electoral activity, again, is different.
No, and I agree with you there. If you want to give to a C3, that's fine. But here's the other thing too, Brad, that you may not be aware of. Maybe you are. But there are actually C4s acting in Oklahoma elections that were huge in last year's elections. Millions of dollars spent by C4, several in particular that don't follow any IRS guidelines at all. You're only supposed to use 40% of the total that comes into your C4 for political purposes. They use 100%. They haven't filed 990s. They haven't done any of this kind of thing. They have been brought up to the IRS crew, Citizens for Responsible and Ethical Government in Washington, which, of course, we all know is an oxymoron. But anyway, they have filed numerous complaints with the IRS on these C4s, but nothing's happened to them. Right. So,
that's a problem across the board. I mean, it's, having regulations is one thing, enforcement is another, and in a lot of different spheres, including election law. There's almost no enforcement. And
that makes my point. I mean, I hate to tell you, but you walked right into that one because that kind of made my point. I mean, we think, I appreciate the fact that you are a sweet Christian man who, is hopeful. I mean, you're just a hopeful character. I mean, that's kind of who you are. Me, on the other hand, and Julia are cynics. I mean, we're hopeful, but we're extreme cynics because we've seen the way. Yeah. I mean, we've seen the way government has worked. I mean, you start at the Common Core, what we did with Common Core, and you get your nose rubbed in the dirt by government, and you find out really quickly that it's not on your side. I mean, Trump can tell you that.
But remember, we defeated Common Core, so there are reasons to be optimistic.
Oh no, we didn't.
It got repealed from state statutes after 5 very long, hard years of educating the public, but they did not take Common Core out of
right. So as an official policy, now the fact that it's still in the system in various iterations obviously is part of the problem. But the fact that Governor Fallon was trying to officially implement this system was at least officially defeated. We can't control what they're doing because they're going to do it no matter what. We see this in CRT. They're changing it to, what is it, SEL now, and all these other iterations. And that's, again, the problem with public schools is that they're going to keep pushing their agenda under different names. But that just makes my point. That's why we need to give incentives for school choice and give parents the means with which to make those choices.
And I'm going to say,
you're right.
But government doesn't have to be involved. We can build schools without government.
Assuming that there's enough private money to get there, but there's not.
But the Catholic Church does. Okay, let's stop because we're at 10:50. And we'll just keep going around in this circle for another hour and 50 minutes. So
the millions of dollars that have been spent trying to change laws could be spent building schools and giving scholarships.
I think it's both and. And we are, those millions of dollars are being spent on new schools.
Well, Brett, you are a good sport to sit here and argue with us like this today. You really
are. Well, my mother always said, Brett, you would argue with a fence post. And so it's always been true. It always will be.
And my mom said the same thing about me. So that was. But, I think the bottom line is honestly, and we said this with David Bullard, because we had Senator David Bullard on just recently, and we were arguing with him too. And I think and I will say it again, just because I feel like it's important. Brett, do you still like me?
Yes. Hey,
I still like you too.
I argue with my wife every day.
But I think that's the problem, is that somehow and it's gotten way worse lately. I mean, now we argue and fight, and we really fight, and it's over all kinds of things, skin color, what you do in your private life. I mean, everything has been reduced to some kind of cage fight.
Right.
And it has to stop. We're never going to get anywhere in the world if we can't come together, and especially Christians. And Christians, that doesn't mean sit on your hands or put one hand over your mouth and sit on the other one. That's not what that means. Have discussions in love with other people. You don't have to give up your ideas. You don't have to give up your truth. You don't have to do that. Don't do that. Speak out, but don't yell at people and try to hit them either. That's just not gonna.
That's not helpful.
No, and I really do feel like the people that were, and we had quite a few on today live. I feel like that the people that were watching probably got a lot out of this because, Brett, you were willing to sit down and talk with us. So God bless you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, if we could just keep doing this on a regular basis, I think the world would be a lot better place.
I think so. And my mantra has been, certainly at the Capitol, I'm willing to work with everybody on something. And I think that's the attitude we have to have. Everybody has something good to offer. Sometimes it needs to be, teased out of them, but that's the attitude we have to have. At the end of the day, we're all in this for a good cause. Some people just don't recognize what that is yet. We need to be educated. Yeah.
Well, and you would agree, I know, that we need to stand on our principles. We can't work with so many people that we end up losing our principles, because the sanctity of life is important. And, we have to, especially as Christians, we have our principles. We know what those are, and we have to continue to stand on those. So.
That's right. Amen.
All right. Bless your heart, Brett. And you have a blessed weekend coming up. And thank you again so much for being on with us. And we really enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you
Thank you,
around,
Sam.
I'm sure.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was fun.
That was. He's a
I mean, they're
very,
really,
very nice and patient man.
yeah, he really was. And again, I just can't help but, stress the fact that, I still like Brett. He's a super likable guy. We just don't agree. And I just think that a lot of what we talked about, I think it was important.
Right. I think so too. And I like for people to hear both sides of the argument to come to their conclusions.
Well, and I think if we don't, um, uh-oh. Oh, I had a new slide that we were going to put up today, and I'm not sure if I can find the slide that I just made. Isn't that funny? I know. Why? And for some reason, it's taking forever to load. So we're getting close to a 2-hour show today, which I didn't imagine that we were going to have.
I know.
So let me see if I can find where that went.
Let me tell you first, we've got Joy Pullman coming on Friday, and she is the editor of The Federalist and a very smart person. She helped us in our interim study against Common Core years ago, and you've written for The Federalist, so she's a smart lady. She'll be on Friday.
There we go.
There you go.
Oh, yeah, except something went completely wackadoo there when you put that in, didn't it? That's odd. Okay. Yes. So Joy will be on the 18th, and you want to talk about Yvette Hampton?
Yvette Hampton did Schoolhouse Rocked, and we're going to have her on next Wednesday. And her Facebook page is awesome. So if you want to follow somebody else, I highly recommend her Facebook page.
So we will, that's what's upcoming for this week, for Friday and then for Monday. So thank you so much for staying with us for this long. And I hope that you got something out of it and we were at some point instructive. And if we were, please note that on the bottom, we have a donor page, and we would really appreciate you helping us out with some donations. We do all of this, and Rope has always operated on our grocery budget, as Julia says. And it really, it's a sad state of doing business in the world today. But if we're going to get information out, unfortunately, people ask for money for us to do that. So if you can help us out, we would really appreciate it. Go to rope2.org/donate. And you can find Venmo there, PayPal, Give, Send, Go. And there's one other way to, or you can send a check. Just send a check, and you can send it to the address that's on our website. So there are 4 ways to donate. We would just really appreciate it if you took the time to do that and to help us out if you've seen anything that you like here. And we just hope you have a wonderful day. Anything else, Jules?
That's it.
Okay, perfect.
See you Friday.
Friday morning at 9. So we'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in.